The strip club hummed with its usual rhythm, the low throb of bass shaking the walls, the laughter of patrons mingling with the clink of glasses. I stood behind the bar, wiping down a counter sticky with spilled drinks, my back to the stage where one of the newer dancers swayed under the neon lights. This was my world at night. Smoke-filled air, the sting of cheap perfume, and a steady stream of men who paid to forget their lives for a while. It was a life I'd kept hidden from everyone I knew. My family thought I worked the late shift at a diner, a more palatable explanation for my odd hours and the exhaustion that clung to me during the day. And I liked it that way, clean lines separating who I was at night from the version of myself my family recognized. But tonight that divide threatened to collapse. I hadn't been able to shake the words from my nephew's last text. "I'll be there soon. I hope you missed me." My heart had stopped when I read it. I hadn't seen Nathan since his deployment 6 months ago. The idea of him walking through the doors of this club, of him seeing me here, left a weight in my chest I couldn't ignore. Nathan was my sister's only son. At 18 he was a boy who wore the burdens of a man. Broad shoulders that carried his mother's expectations and a quiet resolve that reminded me of his late father. I remembered him as a lanky teenager, always ready with a joke or a sly grin. But the man he'd grown into in the past 2 years had taken me by surprise. He was serious now, focused, with an intensity in his dark eyes that unsettled me in ways I didn't like to admit. The buzzing of my phone jolted me from my thoughts. I wiped my hands on my apron and pulled it from my back pocket, my pulse quickening. Another message from Nathan. 5 minutes away. Can't wait to see you. I swallowed hard, glancing at the clock on the far wall. Almost midnight. My stomach twisted as I imagined him in his uniform, clean-cut and proud, walking into this place and finding me here. I couldn't let that happen. "I'm stepping out for a minute," I told Rosa, one of the other bartenders. "Don't be long," she called over her shoulder, already reaching for a bottle of tequila. I slipped through the back door into the cool night air, the sounds of the club muffled as the heavy door swung shut behind me. The alley was empty except for the faint orange glow of a cigarette someone had abandoned earlier. I paced, my fingers hovering over my phone as I debated what to say. "Nathan, don't come. Not tonight. I'm busy. Call me later." Every excuse felt thin hollow. I knew him well enough to know he wouldn't listen. He was stubborn like his father, and when Nathan set his mind on something, there was no stopping him. I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel before I saw the car. A familiar silhouette stepped out, his frame backlit by the streetlight at the end of the alley. My heart sank. "Aunt Lena?" Nathan's voice carried across the alley, warm and filled with curiosity. He was taller than I remembered, his shoulders squared and his expression unreadable as he approached. "Nathan." I forced a smile, trying to keep my voice light. "What are you doing here?" He stopped a few feet away, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. "I got a short leave. Thought I'd surprise you." I tried to match his easy tone, though my chest tightened with every word. "And you couldn't wait until morning?" He laughed softly, the sound tugging at something deep in me. "What's the fun in that? I thought you'd be happy to see me." "I am," I said quickly, stepping closer. His eyes flicked over my shoulder to the glowing neon sign above the door I'd come through. I didn't need to turn around to know what it said. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken but undeniable. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something that would break the tension. But before I could, he leaned in. His lips brushed against mine, soft and hesitant at first, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into the kiss, my hands trembling as I reached for him. The kiss deepened, slow and tentative, as if we were testing the boundaries of something fragile and new. It felt wrong, and yet it didn't. It felt inevitable, like a secret we'd both been carrying for far too long. When we finally pulled apart, the silence that followed was deafening. Nathan's eyes searched mine, his expression filled with a mix of uncertainty and hope. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I shouldn't have." I shook my head, cutting him off. Don't apologize." He looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I don't know. Velvet shadows. My stomach churned. You work here? His tone wasn't accusatory, just surprised. I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. It's temporary. He nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Guess that's why Mom doesn't know. I stiffened. Nathan, don't. I'm not judging. He cut me off gently, his gaze steady. I just didn't expect it. Neither did I admitted, wrapping my arms around myself against the chill. But we all do what we have to, don't we? He nodded again, and for a moment, there was only the sound of distant cars and the hum of the club behind me. Then he said softly, I missed you, you know. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the weariness in his face, the shadows under his eyes. He'd seen more in the past 6 months than most people did in a lifetime, and suddenly, my secrets felt small and insignificant in comparison. I missed you too, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there in the quiet, the distance between us both vast and achingly small. I didn't know what to say, how to bridge the gap between the boy I used to know and the man standing in front of me. But before I could find the words, he reached out, his hand brushing my arm. Come on, he said, a small smile playing at his lips. Let's get out of here. I hesitated, glancing back at the door. I could still hear the faint pulse of music, the laughter and chatter of a world I'd become too familiar with. But when I looked at Nathan, I felt the pull of something else. A reminder of who I was before the shadows became my home. I nodded, letting him lead me toward his car. As we drove through the quiet streets, the tension in my chest began to ease, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time, the warmth of connection. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. Nathan's presence had a way of pulling me into the light, whether I was ready for it or not. The city unfolded before us as we drove through its quiet streets, the hum of Nathan's car mingling with the soft strains of music from the radio. He'd chosen a station that played old classics, the kind of songs that felt timeless, comforting. The cool night air flowed through the open windows, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and the occasional scent of fresh bread from a bakery preparing for the morning. I leaned back in the seat, stealing glances at Nathan as he drove. His face was calm, the tension I'd seen earlier replaced with an ease that reminded me of the boy he used to be. But there was something more, confidence in the way he gripped the wheel, a quiet authority in the way he carried himself. It was strange and beautiful all at once, seeing the traces of the boy I'd known in the man beside me. Hungry? He asked, breaking the silence. His voice was casual, but his tone carried a note of insistence, as if he wouldn't take no for an answer. I smiled. A little. Why? There's this place, he said, turning down a narrow street lined with dimly lit storefronts. Open all night. Best burgers in town. You're gonna love it. I couldn't help but laugh. You sound pretty confident. You'll see, he said, throwing me a quick grin. True to his word, the place was a hidden gem. A neon sign flickered above the door, and the smell of grilled meat and fresh fries hit me the moment we stepped inside. The diner was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers nursing their coffees in a corner booth. Nathan ordered for us without hesitation, his familiarity with the menu making me smile. We waited for our food in companionable silence, and when it was ready, he grabbed the brown paper bag and held the door open for me. Come on. I've got an idea. The next thing I knew, we were parked on a quiet overlook at the edge of the city. Nathan pulled the bag of food from the back seat, and we climbed onto the hood of his car, the cool metal beneath us a sharp contrast to the warmth of the night. The stars stretched endlessly above, pinpricks of light against a velvet sky. I unwrapped my burger, the paper crinkling softly in the stillness. You weren't kidding, I said after my first bite, savoring the rich, smoky flavor. This is amazing. Told you, Nathan said, his smile wide. You should trust me more. We ate in silence for a while, the sounds of the city distant and muffled below us. I felt strangely at peace, as if the weight I'd been carrying for so long had lifted, if only for a little while. When I glanced over at Nathan, I found him watching me. What? I asked, feeling suddenly self-conscious. You look different, he said, his voice soft. Not in a bad way. Just different. I raised an eyebrow. Different how? He shrugged, setting his food aside. I don't know. You seem stronger. More sure of yourself. I laughed, though the sound came out quieter than I'd intended. I don't know about that. You are, he insisted, his eyes holding mine. You don't see it, but I do. You've been through a lot, Aunt Lena. And you're still here, still standing. It's something. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard, and I didn't know how to respond. I looked down at my hands, the half-eaten burger forgotten as I tried to steady the rush of emotion his words stirred in me. Thank you, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was light, tentative, but it sent a jolt through me. When I looked up, his expression was unreadable, a mix of emotions I couldn't quite place. You're beautiful, you know that, he said, his voice low. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Nathan. I mean it, he said, his gaze unwavering. I've always thought so. I admitted. But I'm not angry. Nathan nodded, his gaze dropping to the space between us. I didn't plan for this to happen, he said softly. I couldn't help it. I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Nathan, we need to be careful. I know, he said, his voice firm. I needed you to know how I feel. My chest tightened at his words, and for a moment I couldn't speak. The weight of what had just happened hung heavy between us, but beneath it was something else. A connection raw and unfiltered that neither of us could ignore. We'll figure it out, I said finally, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. But not tonight. Tonight, let's just be here. Nathan nodded, his hand brushing against mine once more. And as we sat there beneath the stars, the world around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the quiet hum of something neither of us fully understood, but both of us felt. Later, I invited Nathan to come to my house. The drive back to my house was quiet at first, the hum of the car and the distant sound of the radio filling the space between us. I couldn't stop glancing at Nathan out of the corner of my eye, catching the way his jaw tightened as he focused on the road, the faint crease in his brow as if he was deep in thought. I was too. The kiss we'd shared on the hood of his car lingered like a spark, lighting every corner of my mind no matter how much I tried to push it aside. It had been impulsive, something that felt both wrong and yet so achingly right in the moment. I didn't know what it meant or where it would lead, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him, the way I'd always felt but had worked so hard to bury. Nathan broke the silence first. So, are you seeing anyone? His tone was casual, but his hands gripped the wheel a little tighter, betraying his curiosity. I raised an eyebrow, caught off guard. Why do you ask? He shrugged, keeping his eyes on the road. Just wondering. I mean, you're amazing. It's hard to imagine no one's tried to win you over. His words sent a warmth through me that I didn't want to acknowledge. I laughed softly, more to cover my nerves than anything else. Well, thank you. But no, I'm not seeing anyone. I've been busy. Busy? He repeated, glancing at me with a knowing smirk. Too busy for dinner or drinks with someone. Come on, Aunt Lena. I rolled my eyes at the teasing in his voice. Yes, too busy. And don't act so surprised. Not everyone's life is as exciting as yours. Nathan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. My life isn't that exciting. A lot of running, training, and being yelled at. Trust me, it gets old fast. But you're good at it, I said, and his smile faltered slightly, a hint of something more serious settling in his features. Maybe, he said after a moment. But it's not easy. I wanted to ask more, to press him on what he meant, but before I could, he turned the question back on me. So, if you're not seeing anyone, is it because you don't want to? Or because no one's good enough? I gave him a pointed look, trying not to let his words unnerve me. Are you always this nosy? He grinned, the playful glint in his eyes making my heart skip. Only when it's important. I shook my head, leaning back against the seat. It's complicated. I don't really think about dating much. My life's messy. Most people wouldn't understand. Nathan's smile faded, his expression softening. Maybe you're selling yourself short. The right person wouldn't care about all that. I didn't have an answer for that, so I deflected. What about you? Are you seeing anyone? He laughed a little too quickly. Not really. Not really. I repeated, raising an eyebrow. That sounds suspiciously non-committal. He shrugged, his hands tightening on the wheel again. There's no one special if that's what you mean. I guess. I've been too busy to. Something in his tone caught my attention, a hint of hesitation that made me wonder if there was more to the story. But before I could ask, he glanced at me and added, besides, no one's really caught my eye. I felt a rush of something I didn't want to name, relief? Excitement? Whatever it was, it sent a warmth through me that I tried to ignore. We pulled into my driveway a few minutes later, the porch light casting a soft glow over the front of the house. I unlocked the door, letting us in, and Nathan followed close behind, his presence filling the small space in a way that felt both comforting and overwhelming. Make yourself at home, I said, gesturing toward the couch. I'll grab us something to drink. He nodded, settling onto the couch with an ease that made it feel like he'd been there 100 times before. I headed into the kitchen, opening the fridge and pulling out a couple of sodas. My hands shook slightly as I twisted the caps off, the weight of the evening pressing down on me all at once. When I returned, Nathan was leaning back against the couch, one arm draped along the backrest. He smiled when he saw me, taking the drink I offered and patting the cushion beside him. Sit with me. I hesitated for a moment before joining him, the air between us thick with an unspoken tension. He sipped his drink, his gaze flicking toward me every so often as if he wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Thanks for letting me come over, he said finally, his voice quiet. I didn't mean to ambush you tonight. I smiled softly, shaking my head. You didn't ambush me. I'm glad you came. Even after? He trailed off, his eyes searching mine. I knew what he was asking even if he didn't say it outright. Even after, I said, my voice steady. He nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Good. Because I meant what I said earlier. You're amazing, Aunt Lena. And I don't just mean the way you look. You're strong and kind and I've always looked up to you. His words sent a rush of emotion through me and I looked away, unsure of how to respond. Nathan. I'm not saying it to make things weird, he added quickly. I wanted you to know. I turned back to him, my chest tight with the weight of everything unsaid between us. Thank you, I said softly. That means more to me than you know. For a moment we just sat there, the silence stretching out between us. And then, almost without thinking, I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. His grip tightened slightly, his thumb brushing against mine in a gesture so simple yet so intimate it made my breath catch. We stayed like that for a long time, the world outside fading into the background. For the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself be still, the quiet hum of connection between us filling the space that words couldn't. Nathan leaned back against the couch, his drink resting on the coffee table, a faint smile playing on his lips. Don't tell Mom I'm here, he said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. His voice was soft but firm, his gaze meeting mine. I'll visit her in a couple of days. I just wanted to see you first. I raised an eyebrow, a small laugh escaping me. You make it sound like a covert mission. Kind of is, he admitted with a grin. Mom would bombard me with questions about my deployment and fuss over every little thing. I just wanted a little peace before that. I understood what he meant. My sister was wonderful, but her protective nature often translated into overwhelming concern. Your secret's safe with me, I said, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling in. I reached for the remote and turned on the TV, scrolling through channels until I found something light. A movie neither of us would have to think too hard about. This okay? I asked. Perfect, Nathan said, his voice warm. I got up and grabbed a blanket from the armchair, draping it over both of us as I settled back down. The blanket was soft and warm, and the way Nathan shifted to wrap his arm around my shoulders felt so natural, so easy that I didn't even think to pull away. His closeness was steadying, a quiet comfort that made me feel safer than I had in years. He sighed, his breath brushing against my hair. It feels so good to be here with you, he murmured, his tone carrying a vulnerability I wasn't used to hearing from him. You don't know how much I missed this. I tilted my head to look at him, my heart catching at the honesty in his eyes. I missed you too, I said softly. More than you know. He smiled, the kind of smile that made his whole face light up. "You've always been my favorite, Aunt Lena," he teased, though there was no mistaking the sincerity behind his words. "Careful," I said, my tone playful but my chest tight with emotion. "Your mom might not like hearing that." He laughed, a deep, rich sound that filled the room and made my heart ache in the best way. "It's true though. You've always been different. I could talk to you about anything, even stuff I'd never tell anyone else." "I've always felt the same way," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's something about us. I don't know. It's always been easy." Nathan nodded, his thumb brushing against my shoulder as he held me. "Even before the army I felt it. Like we had this connection. But now," he trailed off, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting mine again. "Now it's even clearer." His words sent a ripple of warmth through me, and I leaned into him without thinking, my head resting against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, grounding, and I let myself relax fully for the first time in what felt like forever. Nathan had changed so much in the past couple of years. The boy who used to crack jokes and trip over his own feet had become a man. A strong, confident man with broad shoulders and an easy charisma that drew people to him. His time in the army had left its mark, not just in his demeanor but in the sharp lines of his face, the muscles that rippled beneath his shirt, and the stubble that shadowed his jaw. He exuded a quiet strength now, and it stirred something deep within me. "You've grown up so much," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I hardly recognize you." Nathan chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," I said quickly, my cheeks flushing. "It's just different." He looked at me then, his gaze searching mine. "You've changed too," he said softly. "You're more, I don't know, more confident, stronger. But you've always been beautiful." I felt my breath catch at his words, the weight of them settling over me like a warm blanket. "Nathan." "I mean it," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I've thought that for a long time. I didn't know how to say it." My chest tightened, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. "You're saying it now," I murmured, my voice barely audible. He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "'Cause I'm tired of pretending. Being around you feels right. It always has." I didn't know how to respond, so I didn't. Instead, I let the moment stretch out between us, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The movie played on, forgotten, as we sat there wrapped in each other, the quiet hum of connection filling the space between us. Nathan tightened his hold on me, his fingers brushing against my arm in a way that sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't want this to end," he said softly, his lips close to my ear. "I feel like I can breathe when I'm with you." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes and I blinked them away quickly. "Me too," I admitted, my voice trembling. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, the TV casting a soft glow over the room as the night deepened. I could feel his warmth, the steady rise and fall of his chest, and the quiet reassurance in the way he held me. It was everything I didn't know I needed. A moment of peace, of understanding, of something I couldn't quite name but felt in every fiber of my being. For the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't wrong. That the connection we shared, the calmness, the warmth, the undeniable pull, was something worth holding on to.